So now we're going to look at some examples of the additivity condition, how it works, and if it's reasonable. We start from, in fact, a trivial example from finance. Let's here you remember maybe E1 was the event copper price high in a month, medium, low. Here was speculating on a high copper price in a month. That financial asset we saw it before. Imagine you prefer it to speculating on a high copper price, on a low copper price in a month. Imagine you have this preference. Now the Z, we're going to add a Z to both. That's what the additive condition looks at. Z will be sure 30k. Then X plus Z is going to be 80, 0, 0. Y plus Z is going to be 0, 0, 80. Add some lines to make it more clear. So additivity says if you have the first preference, you should have the second. The first preference, let's interpret it a bit. It has a good outcome 50 and otherwise bad outcome. The only difference between X and Y is that here the good outcome is on the event E1, so high copper price. Here it is on the event E3, low copper price. Apparently you rather gamble on high copper price than on low copper price. That's what this preference suggests. We look at the second preference, good outcome 80, bad outcome 0. The only difference is that here the good outcome is on the high copper price. Here it is on the low copper price. Again, this preference suggests you rather gamble on high copper price than on low copper price. And it means that these two preferences are similar in spirit, the same rationale underlying it. So that the first implies the second makes sense. So the implication of the additivity condition is reasonable here. And so that's a good thing. The condition gives good implication, but maybe a bit of a drawback is that it is quite trivial. You don't need the additivity condition to make the conclusion. This reasoning where you rather gamble on E1 and on E3 holds for both. So this was, okay, additivity gave a correct implication, but it was not very interesting. Next example, I'm going to go to the street vendor example. I put all the payoffs here immediately in the table. This example will be more interesting, also more critical. Here the implication of additivity will be non-trivial. Let us look what's happening. Here we have ice cream, you remember the payoffs. Hot dogs, you remember the payoffs. Z that we add, the same Z, that's what additivity looks at. And Z could for instance be that you also take magazines with you. X plus Z, 550, 200, minus 350. Here, minus 250, 200, 450, indeed. Additivity says if you have the first preference, you should have the third. Now, is this a reasonable condition here? It's not so very clear to see, and in fact, I encourage you to try to think of a reason that it would not hold. So maybe you can stop the recording now, look at the numbers, think for a moment. Can you think of a reason that maybe you would have the first preference here, but not the second? Try to think of a reason of that. So try to find an argument against additivity. And I can give you some time now. So I assume now that you've done your thinking, you're back to listening to recording. And then let me tell you what reason is often advanced and can be advanced for violating additivity. It could be said that X and Y are quite similar in nature. Good outcome, bad outcome. The only thing is you're gambling on a different event here than here. Okay, it can happen. If you, however, compare X plus Z and Y plus Z, they seem to be more different. X plus Z has one very nice, very high 550. You don't find it here. But it has the very low, very unpleasant minus 350. You don't find it here either. X plus Z has more extreme amounts than Y plus Z. X of Z is a little bit, sort of leverage a bit, enhancing the pattern of X. And here, for Y plus Z, Z is a bit tuning down, moderating. It's a sort of bit of a hedge for Y. You could interpret it that way. Anyway, here X plus Z is more risky than Y plus Z. So it is conceivable that somebody says, okay, I prefer X to Y, rather gamble on no rain than on all rain. But here I have an extra reason for disliking X plus Z. It's getting very risky. I really dislike this minus 350. So that's why there's extra reason for me to dislike X plus Z more than Y plus Z, so that I may prefer Y plus Z still, even though here I prefer X. So that can be a reason to go against additivity. Risk perception, being more risky here, can be such a reason. Now, this is an interesting situation. I believe, well, soon I will have to moderate a bit the additivity condition, but that's not relevant here. But other than that, I believe that additivity is a reasonable rationality condition. It should be satisfied. So additivity is at variance here with this risk perception reasoning. So I think that there is something wrong about that risk perception reasoning. It's not so very easy to explain, and it's also not so easy to understand. Like, I'm now throwing this idea at you quickly. You need to think a long time about them before you can really make up your mind. We don't have the time now, so I'm not. I don't have the ambition that I can fully convince you right now, but I'll do my best maybe. But here, such situation interesting. You have instincts going one way, like an instinct that you should avoid risk. Then you get a condition from a theory that maybe reasonable goes the other way. Then you have something to think about. And you can, in my case, it made me think, it made me learn, put it like that, that a risk aversion instinct is inappropriate. And I believe, and many other examples in this course will come, that in general people are too afraid of risk, too risk averse, so they lose many good opportunities in life, because sometimes you have to take risk and sometimes be willing to take a loss, so to get the good things in life. So that is one of the general lessons that I have learned from studying this field, and that will be repeated in this course also in future meetings. It's also going on here. I think additivity, I'll discuss later why additivity is reasonable. But this is a sort of a critical, interesting example. So I call it central example. Let's move on to another example from finance again. Now, an example where additivity is not at all reasonable. It's unreasonable. So I put up all the payments in one blow. Here we have X speculating on the high copper price. Imagine you prefer it to Y speculating on the low copper price. For C, we now take now C in the previous finance example, C was a constant. Now C is not constant, making it more interesting. Z is 40k, 0 minus 40k. Here the same Z, you get 90 minus 30 minus 70, 10 minus 30, 10. Additivity says if you prefer x to y, you should prefer x to plus z to y plus c. Is that reasonable? Well, maybe here there can be a situation in which it is absolutely not reasonable. Because again, x plus z is much more risky than y plus z, more extreme amounts. In fact, you can see that z is a sort of, here first maybe, z is a sort of a hedge against y. It neutralizes the variance in the y outcomes quite a bit. Here z works more like leverage. It amplifies the variance in the outcomes of x. So those are terminologies from finance. But anyway, we have more risk here than here, and it can be bad. For instance, if your company cannot afford to lose more than 60k, then you go broke. And if that is very bad for you to go broke, you really can't risk it, then you really should not take X plus C, and you will prefer Y plus C. Even though in the upper here, the situation, you prefer X to Y. Here, the risk is just too big. That's a fully rational, reasonable argument, and that gives a violation of additivity. So I should not claim that additivity should hold in general, and is generally rational. I should modify it. The modification is additivity is reasonable only for moderate amounts of money. Here there are very extreme amounts of money that can make you go bring about ruin. So that's too extreme. Maybe in more words, if that extra payment Z does not change your life situation, of course you get some money more or less, but it doesn't really change your way of living. It's not a big life changer. So, in more theoretical terms, the extra happiness from the marginal utility of money should not change. For those of you who know what utility means, and that's, I guess, everybody already, or all the economists. Anyway, for moderate amounts of C, when C doesn't change your lifestyle, then I think it should not change your preference between X and Y. Almost as circular it is. And that's why I think, in general, for moderate amounts of money, additivity is a reasonable condition. That's why in this critical example, the most interesting one, the one for most thinking about, this one. Here, I assume also in your case, maybe losing 400 euros is not nice, but it doesn't change your lifestyle. Well, if it does, then the amounts are extreme. But let's assume they are moderate amounts for you. They don't change your lifestyle. Then I think whether you get C or not should not change your preference. It should just depend on whether no rain is more likely than all rain or not. That should also here decide your preference. And the extra risk here is not a relevant point. Though human instincts have quite a bit of disliking risk, I think the human beings are too risk averse, as I already said. That's what I learned from additivity, why I like it. But I can imagine you really have to think. You can't decide on this in 1 hour. You have to quite often think about it, sleep over it, and then you get the feeling that maybe your instinct is really not so good. That's but that's what I like, that you can learn it from this decision theory that we are doing, the behavioral approach. Anyway, I'm going to ask you for the rest of this meeting, the recordings of the meeting, that you give me this one. But from now on, I'm going to assume that all the amounts are moderate. And please just give me, let's now assume that we agree that additivity is a rationality condition. So then from now on, we're going to see what implications come from this rationality, from the advice that the advisor gave us. He said you should do monotonicity, transitivity, additivity. That will have many interesting implications. They will be analyzed next, but that will happen in the next recording. I'm going to stop this recording here.